What is Skid Row? Skid Row is not a social failure. Skid Row is not a societal disease. Skid Row is a symptom of a larger social failure. Skid Row is a symptom of a wider social disease. In Skid Row, we see all the symptoms of the illnesses that have permeated our society. We see loneliness. I did a group therapy at the clinic. I had a woman I recruited for the group. She's in her 70s, illegal immigrant, recycles cans out of garbage cans to have money for things like food, and doesn't speak to anyone who's not trained to speak to people with mental illnesses. She came to the group. She didn't talk. And I asked her during the group, at the end of it, well, how was your experience in group today? And she said, good. I laughed once. And I said, laughter is good. She said, yes, I haven't laughed in a year. Skid Row carries a lot of depression. Part of what I do involves seeing people who look me in the eye and say, I want to die today. And then my job is to assess them, to see if I'm supposed to call an ambulance, to have the county take custody of them for 72 hours. People who feel like they've lost hope. Skid Row has addiction. One of my clients described when he uses meth. He uses so much meth that he needs to take meth to go to sleep because being off of it disturbs his sleep cycle more than being on crystal meth pumps him up. He says when he cuts meth, he cries. He cries and says, you again, you again. Skid Row has mental illness, a lot of it. Schizophrenia is more than well represented. I think schizophrenia is a bit indicative of the kinds of mental illnesses of our society because as Ian McFarlane described in a different TED Talk, schizophrenia actually has not really been known to exist in pre-industrial societies. Many think that it is a disease of industrialized societies in which everything is quantified, compassion is negated, and the left brain of society and the left brain of the individual completely take over. And Skid Row has racism. You can tell because when you walk a few blocks north, you're in Little Tokyo and everything changes. You walk a few blocks west, you're officially downtown and everything changes. You go into Skid Row and it's a whole other demographic. What is Skid Row? Skid Row is a mirror for our society. And in this mirror, we see a lot of the ills of our society. We see social pain. And we don't like seeing pain. We don't like seeing the hurt that is this society. We do not then heal this pain, we judge it. We spend money, in my mind, not so much to change the status quo, to maintain it, not so much to help the people of Skid Row, but to punish them. I honestly think that on an unconscious level, that is the reason our policies are the way they are. We misallocate our resources, even though there's plenty of them. We spend so much more money on ER visits when it would be so much cheaper to allow for more health insurance. This is not controversy, this is a fact. It's much cheaper to address a problem than to respond to it after the fact. We spend so much money responding to the ills of homelessness, such as crime, and drugs, and all the other pervading issues, instead of doing things like cheap housing. I would say my favorite, but I guess I have to say it with an irony. My favorite example is that ashing. If any of you smoke cigarettes when you walk down the street, you don't carry an ashtray with you, right? You take a drag and you tap eventually, right? Well, if you're white, and if you're not in Skid Row, you're not going to get a ticket for ashing. It sounds like I'm making it up. In Skid Row, you may get a ticket for ashing by the police. This is a good point to tell you that Skid Row is considered by some to be the most policed neighborhood in the world outside of Iraq. So there are resources. When you get a ticket for ashing, you may be asked to pay $200, which is ironic because if you're living off GR, general relief, you're living off of $221 a month, and this has not gone up since 1987. So you can't pay your ticket, so you may end up going to jail. Or perhaps you are on parole and you didn't make a phone call on time to your parole officer. Then you're going to go to jail for 90 days. That's a parole violation. I worked in Twin Towers Correctional Facility, which is right across the street from Union Station. It's the world's largest mental hospital. The world's largest mental hospital is a jail. You're going to end up going there for 90 days. You miss a phone call if you show up late by 20 minutes to an appointment with the parole officer. It's a 90-day parole violation. You're going to go to Twin Towers for 90 days. When I worked there, I've estimated that 1 out of 3 of my clients there were there because of these kinds of parole violations. Incarcerating someone in Twin Towers is pricey, about $60,000 a year. So 90 days divided by 4, that's $15,000 because someone couldn't pay their ashing ticket, because someone who's homeless and mentally ill didn't make a phone call on time because they showed up 30 minutes late. 4 and $15,000, you can house someone for a long time. So what is Skid Row? It's a place where we spend more to do less. But what is Skid Row in the psyche of Los Angeles? I'm a therapist. I think of therapy, I think of the psyche, and I think that the psyche of Los Angeles is a collective entity, and that Skid Row is our shadow. It's not something bad. In Jungian terms, a shadow is something that is simply not brought to consciousness, just as much a part of the individual. It's just something that you do not admit to yourself, and many people simply don't like to admit Skid Row exists, which is why it's so concentrated. I lived in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, the south side of Chicago. I taught in the inner city of Brooklyn, and there's nothing like Skid Row in the United States. Skid Row is where Los Angeles hides secrets. And yet, isn't it interesting that there's another neighborhood in Los Angeles that exists that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth, which is also unique, and that's Hollywood. Just one subway away, it's the Red Line. It's the same subway I take to work. You have Skid Row here, and over here you have Hollywood. I don't think it's a coincidence that these two completely unique neighborhoods, these completely unique entities, exist in the same city. They grew up roughly a few miles apart. They grew up roughly in the same size. They grew up about a generation apart from each other. This is the shadow. Yes. This is the fantasia. This is the fantasy. The city of angels, or the city of demons. This is the bright dreams. This is the dark nightmare. And I feel that in the collective psyche of Los Angeles, we've polarized suffering. We've said that so much of our city is about the bright dreams, the bright lights that literally blinded me up here. Well, what's the other side of that? I think that Skid Row and Hollywood are polarized subcultures. They're very extreme concentrations of values that already exist in our society. And I think each one of them implies the other. And they both have their police misallocation too. Most oftentimes I see cops in downtown is when they're helping someone shoot commercials or when they're harassing homeless people. So I would like us to be more aware of what Skid Row means. I would like us to be conscious that Skid Row may be a part of our collective psyche. Because then if we can finally understand what our suffering means, it'll have meaning for us. If we can raise the contents of the unconscious to the level of consciousness, we no longer have to call what is unconscious fate, as Jung says, we can actually address it. And maybe then the suffering of Skid Row will have meaning for all. And maybe then the suffering of Skid Row can end. As I drove here, I stopped next door. I saw 5 cats in a circle. One of them had a mouse in its mouth, which was alive. It was torturing it. It would let it go and torture it more. I wanted to hop the fence and kill the mouse with mercy instead of watching it get tortured, but there was barbed wire all over the fence. Sometimes the only thing you can do is hold compassion but sometimes there's so much more that we can do. And I urge everyone to understand that there's more for us to understand in Skid Row than the problems of poverty and the solutions of poverty. I think Skid Row very much represents what is in the heart of each of us.